Today's narrative is centered around the world's leading language learning application, Babel. Initially, I was hesitant when I learned Babel wanted to sponsor this channel, as I preferred to endorse only products I personally use. I doubted my ability to learn a new language, especially since my French skills acquired in elementary and high school are quite poor, comparable to Joey Tribbiani's on Friends. Nonetheless, I decided to try Babel by learning Dutch, and the experience proved to be both rewarding and inspiring. Babel begins with simple lessons designed to prevent overwhelm, gradually increasing in difficulty as you progress. The platform also offers engaging podcasts and interactive games that make language acquisition enjoyable. Its focus is on practical, everyday communication, which boosted my confidence significantly. Now, I feel prepared to visit the Netherlands, knowing how to say basic phrases like, "Where is the toilet?" and, more importantly, how to pronounce Netherlands herring correctly. Currently, Babel offers an excellent deal. By clicking the link in the description, you can purchase 6 months of access and receive an additional 6 months free. With this offer, you can start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. For those interested, the special promotion, buy 6 months, get 6 free, is just a click away. Shifting to a different story, in 1922 in Antwerp, Belgium, 21-year-old Albert van der Ross married 17-year-old Jean-Luc War. Sometime after their marriage, Jean gave birth to twins. Following their birth, Albert returned to a woman he found amusing before his marriage, which upset Jean deeply. In a desperate attempt to conceal his infidelity, Albert enlisted his identical twin brother to impersonate him, moving in with Jean. This deception worked temporarily until Jean discovered she was living with Albert's brother. She then took her twins and moved back to her parents' home. Tragically, after her departure, one of the twins died, which enraged Albert. He blamed the death on his in-laws and, in a fit of rage, asked Jean to return. However, she was no longer interested in reconciliation. In 1925, Jean filed for divorce. Albert reacted violently, shooting her 5 times, resulting in her death. Her father, Louis Wessar, who was present at the scene, vowed revenge. Albert was arrested and faced trial for murder. During the proceedings, Louis Wessar attended daily, secretly bringing 2 guns and a dagger, intending to kill Albert himself. Fortunately, he never had the chance. Albert was sentenced to 20 years of hard labor, but served only 7 after an appeal. Upon release, he moved to Paris and soon became engaged to a wealthy widow, with plans to marry in June of 1933. In April of 1933, Louisa, the father of Sean, traveled to Paris in search of his former son-in-law. On his 6th attempt, he discovered that Albert was residing in a hotel room. For 2 days, Louisa waited patiently near the hotel entrance until he finally saw 32-year-old Albert van der Ross emerge onto the street. Without hesitation, Louisa drew his weapon and fired 4 shots, causing Albert to collapse onto the pavement. Approaching the fallen man, Louisa delivered a 5th bullet into his daughter's killer. Afterwards, he went directly to the nearest police station to surrender himself. In December of 1934, Louisa faced trial. The judge noted that Albert had already been convicted and served time for murdering Louisa's daughter. Louisa declared that only Albert's death could truly atone for his crimes, emphasizing that he had fired 5 shots at her daughter and now had received 5 in return. He firmly believed justice had been served. Despite admitting in court to killing Albert van der Vos, Louisa was ultimately acquitted of all charges, leaving the legal outcome unresolved. Julian Maynard's story begins in Alabama, where his mother was adopted by a man named Raymond Earl Brooks. Although the exact timing remains uncertain, Julia recalls that from a very young age, probably around 4, Brooks began sexually abusing her. The abuse persisted over many years, and Julia admits she cannot remember precisely when it started, only that it lasted long enough for her to believe it was normal. She confided that the abuse made her feel loved in a distorted way, different from her parents' affection. When she was 8, the truth surfaced. Brooks had been molesting her. In late 2002, Brooks was arrested and subsequently pleaded guilty to charges related to the sexual abuse. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison but was released early in February of 2005. Julia grew up enduring daily sexual abuse, which she described as relentless and deeply traumatic, leading to post-traumatic stress disorder. Despite eventually having 3 children of her own, she never forgave her abuser, Brooks, who had served only about 2 years and 3 months in prison for his crimes. By June 8th of 2014, Julia, now around 22, mentioned Brooks to her father, Jay Maynard, who hadn't seen him in at least 12 years. Although Julia couldn't recall her exact words, her comment ignited a powerful memory in Jay's mind. The pain and betrayal of what Brooks had done to Julia had been festering ever since her disclosure, fueling Jay's intense hatred for the man who had stolen his daughter's innocence. Jay believed it was unjust that Brooks, who had abused Julia for nearly 4 years, received such a short prison sentence. That day, driven by a mixture of anger and a desire for justice, Jay took his motorcycle and headed toward Brooks's residence in Berlin, Alabama, where Brooks lived with his parents. En route, he stopped at a local convenience store called Berlin Plaza Quick Stop, which housed a barbecue restaurant named Mad Dog Mike's BBQ. Inside, Jay encountered a stepdaughter's ex-boyfriend, whom he suspected of being abusive. Believing the man posed a threat, Jay drew his gun and fired, missing his target but shooting through a window into the store. The young man fled and hid, while Jay calmly entered the establishment and demanded to know his whereabouts. The store's owner, Mike Hayes, who was also armed, advised Jay to leave peacefully, and Jay complied, returning to his motorcycle. Later, Jay traveled to Brooks's home, where he found him outside. Without hesitation, Jay shot Brooks once, killing him instantly. He then mounted his motorcycle and rode away. Soon afterward, a police officer stopped him, leading to his arrest. The incident made headlines, and many community members supported Jay, believing they would have acted similarly in his position. A Facebook page was created to rally support, and numerous fundraisers were held to cover his legal expenses. However, not everyone approved of his actions. The owner of Mad Dog Mike's BBQ, for example, called Jay a psychopathic lunatic, criticizing the fact that there were several people inside the quick stop when the gunfire erupted. He questioned whether Jay would still be seen as a hero if he had accidentally killed an innocent bystander. Nearly 2.5 years later, in November of 2016, Jay Maynard pleaded guilty to murder for killing Brooks and to attempted murder for shooting at his stepdaughter's ex-boyfriend. He received a sentence of 40 years in prison for the murder and an additional 20 years for the attempted murder, with both terms to run concurrently. Jay explained that he chose to plead guilty to prevent the details of his daughter's abuse from becoming public during a trial. Julia expressed her gratitude for this decision, feeling it spared her further trauma. In essence, he took responsibility to shield me from reliving the trauma of molestation and the ordeal of testifying in court, which would have reopened painful memories. His protective instinct mirrored that of a true father, shielding me from the emotional toll of recounting such horrors in front of strangers. My father's unwavering support exemplified genuine care. He is truly an extraordinary parent, filled with love for his family. Currently, Jay Maynor is incarcerated at the Bibb County Correctional Facility in Brent, Alabama. He is eligible for parole in May of the year 2029, when he will be 57. There is an ongoing petition seeking a pardon from the governor, reflecting the support Jay still commands. Yet, others believe he should serve his full sentence, viewing the backing he receives as problematic. Pat Morrison, a journalist from the Los Angeles Times, criticized the public support, describing it as an unsettling cheerleading for someone accused of meting out private punishment against a sex offender who had already pleaded guilty and served time. She emphasized that when a parent from Alabama or California takes justice into their own hands, they are not heroes, because vengeance is not true justice. Injustice turns victims into perpetrators too. Ultimately, Jay's actions were driven by a desire to avenge what happened to his daughter, Julia. As for Julia herself, her feelings about the situation are complex. In Dve Tisuci Shesnatsit, after her father's sentencing, she expressed her anguish, saying, "I'm going through hell. Everything reminds me of why this happened. I blame myself. I feel sad but also mad." Her words reveal the deep emotional turmoil and confusion that often accompanies such trauma. Turning to a different tragic case, in the summer of 1982, 44-year-old Andrei Bambersky lived in a small village near Toulouse, France. A successful accountant, he had divorced his wife Danielle about 7 years earlier and had recently begun a new relationship. On July 10th of that year, Andrei's life was shattered by a phone call from his ex-wife. Their 14-year-old daughter, Kalinka Bambersky, was found dead in her bed that morning. She had been discovered by her stepfather, Dieter Kombrak. Initially, the cause of death was unknown, and no signs of violence were evident, leading authorities to suspect natural causes. Andrei couldn't accept that his healthy, active daughter had simply died in her sleep. Kalinka was a lively girl who enjoyed skiing, skating, and other sports, making her sudden death all the more perplexing. He doubted the official explanation of suicide, especially given her robust health. The autopsy was conducted 2 days after her death, and Andrei received the report 3 months later. Notably, the presence of Kombrak during the autopsy was against protocol, and the report mentioned that some fresh blood was found around Kalinka's vagina, with torn labia, details that raised suspicion. The report also noted puncture wounds on her arms, leg, and chest. Kombrak claimed he had administered her an iron cobalt injection the night before, supposedly to help her tan, but no toxicology tests were performed on her blood. The removal of her gender dolls, presumably for later examination, further complicated the case. The report concluded that no cause of death could be established, as additional forensic tests on tissue and blood were still needed. Andrei was devastated by his daughter's death, initially believing it to be natural. However, the details in the autopsy report, especially Combrak's presence and the suspicious injuries, prompted him to question whether foul play had occurred. His suspicions grew when he learned that the forensic tests on the blood and tissue samples had not yet been performed. Frustrated and increasingly convinced that her death was not natural, André contacted German authorities to investigate further, which they finally did in early 1983. On the final day of Kalinka's life, she went windsurfing. She returned home around 5 in the afternoon, complaining that she wasn't feeling well. The family dined together at approximately 7:30, after which Kalinka went to bed early. Before sleeping, her father, Krombach, claimed he had given her an iron cobalt injection, explaining it was to treat her anemia rather than for tanning purposes. He later stated that Kalinka had risen around 10 in the evening to drink water, and that she was still awake reading in her room. She had asked him to turn off her lights, and the following morning, they found her already stiff with rigor mortis. Krombach had injected her with drugs, Coramin, Novafil, and Isotopin, in an attempt to revive her, but these efforts proved futile. A forensic expert criticized his use of these medications, especially noting that Kalinka's body showed no signs of rigor mortis at the time of discovery, indicating she had been dead for hours. This suggested she had likely died before the injections were administered, making any attempt at resuscitation pointless. The expert believed that Krombach had injected her while she was still alive, possibly even near death or just after her death, which raised suspicions about his involvement in her demise. Since Krombach claimed to have found Kalinka dead that morning, his injection of drugs afterward might have been an attempt to cover his tracks, especially if blood tests were to be conducted. The iron cobalt, which is not used for tanning but only in rare cases to treat anemia, is dangerous if administered improperly. It can cause symptoms like fever, nausea, and vomiting, and in severe cases, lead to heart failure or respiratory collapse. The forensic expert concluded that the iron cobalt injection caused Kalinka to vomit, leading to her suffocation and death. This led André, her father, to believe that Krombach had intentionally injected his daughter with iron cobalt and then possibly raped her, either to ensure she wouldn't reveal what happened or accidentally killing her through the overdose. The iron cobalt likely caused her to choke on her own vomit, resulting in her asphyxiation. Despite the evidence, German authorities refused to press charges against Krombach. More than a year later, André traveled to Lindau, where Krombach practiced medicine and distributed pamphlets accusing him of murder. The leaflets also alleged that the police and German government were covering up the crime. Krombach was arrested and charged with defamation. He posted bail and returned to France, where he was tried in absentia, found guilty, and fined heavily. However, he could avoid paying the fine by remaining outside Germany until the 5-year statute of limitations expired. Meanwhile, André urged the French government to investigate further, and in 1985 they launched their own inquiry into the case. In their efforts to investigate Kalinka's death, authorities exhumed her remains, but found no new clues. They requested her genitalia for examination, yet it had apparently been lost and was never recovered. This absence prevented definitive proof of whether she had been raped in Odna Tisica Divitsot Vosum Deceit Vosum. The German authorities later provided tissue and blood samples to the French, who analyzed food particles in her respiratory tract and concluded she had died from asphyxiation. 5 years after her death, in April of 1993, French prosecutors charged Dieter Krombach with voluntary homicide. By then, nearly 11 years had passed since Kalinka's demise. If convicted, Krombach faced a maximum sentence of 30 years in prison. The French government requested his arrest through German authorities, but Berlin refused extradition. Consequently, Krombach was tried in absentia in March of 1995 and found guilty, receiving a 15-year sentence. Despite this, the verdict had little impact on his life. He continued practicing medicine and remained part of the city's social elite. Germany never extradited him, considering the trial illegal as long as he remained outside French borders, ensuring he would never serve time in a French prison. In January of 1997, Krombach was finally detained after drugging and raping a 16-year-old patient. She regained consciousness during the assault, but was paralyzed by the sedatives. Her parents reported the crime to police, leading to his conviction in August of that year. He received a 2-year prison sentence, and his medical license was revoked. However, because of his reputation in Germany, the sentence was suspended, and he avoided incarceration. Following his arrest, 6 women came forward, claiming they had also been assaulted by Krombach. Many had hesitated to speak earlier, fearing disbelief or uncertainty about whether drugs had facilitated their assaults. After sentencing, Krombach gave an interview denying the rape of the 16-year-old girl, claiming she had wanted sex with him. During the same interview, he dismissed Andrzej Bamberski as crazy. By 1999, Krombach was frequently moving around, prompting Bamberski to hire a private investigator to track him, convinced he was the man responsible for his daughter's death. Despite losing his medical license, Krombach continued working as a substitute doctor, which eventually led to his arrest for fraud and practicing medicine without a license. Following his arrest, 2 psychiatrists examined Krombach and described him as a narcissist who believed himself above the law. They also labeled him a repulsive sexual predator, noting his history of sexually assaulting patients and staff when left unsupervised. Krombach himself admitted to the psychiatrists that he had drugged and raped several women, including a 16-year-old girl, revealing a disturbing pattern of predatory behavior. Krombach, a former doctor convicted of fraud and practicing medicine without a license, was sentenced to 26 months in prison, of which he served approximately 18 months. His imprisonment took place in France, near the German border, in the city of Malus. On the early morning of October 17, 2009, police in Louvre received a call reporting a disturbance on a street where broken glasses, shoes, and bloodstains had been found. Responding to the scene, officers discovered 74-year-old Dieter Krombach chained to a fence outside the prosecutor's office. He was bleeding from a head wound that caused a skull fracture. Around the same time, Andrzej Bamberski, who was in Louvre, contacted the police, claiming that the chained man was Krombach, a wanted fugitive. Krombach was transported to a hospital and then placed under arrest, while Bamberski was also detained. Police searched Bamberski's hotel room and uncovered nearly 19,000 euros in a safe. Nearby, they found a phone bill belonging to a man named Anton Krasniqi. During questioning, police asked Bamberski if he knew Krasniqi, suspecting that he had hired Krasniqi to kidnap Krombach and smuggle him into France, with the 19,000 euros serving as payment. Bamberski denied any connection to Krasniqi. After 2 days of interrogation, he was released on bail. Krasniqi, along with another man named Kaisel Babaloni, was later arrested for the kidnapping. The German government demanded Kronbach's release, arguing that the statute of limitations on his previous conviction, obtained in absentia, had expired. However, the French authorities refused and reinstated charges against Kronbach. In October, nearly 29 years after Kalinka Bamerski's death, Kronbach faced trial. The defense argued that the trial was illegitimate because Kronbach had been illegally brought into France, and that he was a victim of kidnapping and assault. These points were acknowledged but ultimately dismissed. Expert witnesses testified that tissue samples indicated Kalinka had suffocated, with some suggesting her labia had been torn before death, which caused bleeding. Additionally, a white substance found was most likely semen. 3 women testified that Kronbach had drugged and raped them. After several hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Kronbach of voluntary manslaughter with aggravating circumstances, leading to a maximum sentence of 30 years. The 76-year-old was sentenced to 15 years in prison. In May 2014, Bamerski was tried for kidnapping. He admitted to consenting to the act but claimed he was not involved in the actual abduction. He was convicted of kidnapping and received a 1-year suspended sentence. The actual kidnappers, Krasniqi and Babaloni, were also found guilty and sentenced to 1 year in prison each. For Bamerski, the conviction marked a significant chapter in a case that spanned nearly 3 decades. The crusade for justice finally reached its conclusion when Kronbach was released in February, after serving nearly 9 years in prison. His release was granted on medical grounds, allowing him to return to Germany to live with his daughter. Many believe that Kronbach was responsible for more than just the crimes he was convicted of. Some suspect he may have been involved in other tragic incidents. In 1969, Kronbach was married to his first wife, 24-year-old Monika Henser. Her life took a sudden and devastating turn when she developed severe health issues, becoming blind, mute, and paralyzed. She was hospitalized, and according to her mother, Kronbach pushed aside her attending doctor and injected Monika with what he called snake venom. Shortly afterward, Monika Henser died. Despite the suspicious circumstances surrounding her death, Kronbach was never criminally charged or investigated for her demise. As of the time of this account, Kronbach is 86 years old. While he did not serve as much prison time as 83-year-old Andrei Bamberki might have hoped, his reputation has been irreparably tarnished. Once regarded as a respected doctor, he is now remembered as a notorious serial rapist and murderer. Thank you for following today's story. For more in-depth cases, consider listening to our podcast, Into the Killing, where our latest episode explores the 1984 murder of 14-year-old Tina Fales. The police faced numerous suspects, but the true identity of the killer remained a surprise until over 30 years later, when the suspect was finally arrested. You can find Into the Killing on Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, and other platforms.